Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I gotta say, feeling a bit rusty because we recorded a whole bunch of episodes in like June and we unraveled them over a period of time. And now I'm having to remember how to record things again. But I'm really excited to be kicking it off with someone I feel like I've gotten to know decently over Twitter, Mike Conlow, the Director of Network Strategy at Cloudflare. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here. I'm a longtime listener of the podcast, and it's great to be able to participate.
Yeah, and I feel like you're someone who popped up on my screen, and before I even know what you did, I just saw what you're doing and read some of your analyses, and I was like, oh, this guy's like serious. Like he's interested in this, and he also does serious analytical work about what's going on in broadband space and looking at the data and things like that. And so I was definitely interested in how you got into that.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of an uncommon story. And so just very briefly, I had a long career in political technology. I worked at the Democratic National Committee, and I worked on the 2008 Obama campaign, and I worked back at the Democratic National Committee, and I was a deputy CTO on Obama's 2012 campaign. And I did political technology consulting for nonprofit and political groups after that for a long time. And when the pandemic hit, frankly, I had too much time on my hands and I was a little bored. And I'm a data person by background. I think in SQL as well as I think in English. And so I got to downloading data. I started with the Form 477 data. RDOF was just being released at the time, and started working on analysis of those data sets and really enjoyed it. I obviously have a passion for this. And at some point, the guy who became my boss tweeted something about how Cloudflare was looking for people who kind of think outside of the box or think differently. And I thought that sounds like me. And that's how I wound up at Cloudflare. But yeah, downloading databases.
So is there a world where I'm trying to think of something like, I don't know, like where you came across an interesting data set at the beginning of the pandemic on like bugs and you became really into entomology or something like that? it just happened to be mapping broadband related work?
Just this one. I kind of started following my local politics for a minute. And I very quickly decided I think I was smart to do it. Like, I don't want to get involved in local politics, what they're going to do with the library, and instead focus my attention on broadband data. And so, but yeah, no, that has been the only one, although I'm very much a kind of tinkerer, a technology tinkerer. So I've got lots of kind of smart home and technology projects going on the side, but this is the bigger one.
Well, I think one of the things, and I want to come back to a second to talk about Cloudflare, what you do there, what Cloudflare does, but you also now have a newsletter that people can check out. What's the name of it?
Mike's Substack. I don't know if it has
so it's a Substack. So if people follow you on Twitter, they'll see the stories. One that just caught my eye most recently, where I was like, oh, we should have you on the show, and we'll dig into some of the other topics later. But like, you were just looking at the data around some of the implications of how they're collecting data for buildings and whether and what the what is it, the base. What's the BSL?
Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about that on past shows, and we'll come back to that in a second. But I just wanted to flag for people that while you're listening, you might check out Mike on Twitter and then check out the newsletter stuff. But Cloudflare is a company I've known about for a while. They do seem like, I'm not at all surprised to hear they're looking for someone that thinks outside the box, because they're doing interesting things regularly, and I feel like maybe people have heard about them from like DDoS protection or things like that. But what does Cloudflare do, and what do you do there?
Cloudflare started as a content delivery network, protecting websites and delivering websites, but has grown significantly over the past few years, and is now as much or more a kind of network and security and internet performance company overall, and we have our own developer platform, kind of an edge compute platform, and a whole bunch of network as a service and network protection offerings. But also a big part of what intrigued me about Cloudflare was we take very seriously we're going to help build a better internet part of it. And so I want to make sure I didn't forget to mention one of the Cloudflare projects that we have, which is a free offering to community and nonprofit networks to connect them to the internet for free. And so if you are building, in tribal areas or certain kinds of nonprofits, if you can get a connection to one of our data centers, we'll connect you to the internet for free. We also provide protection for local government and election websites for free. And so Cloudflare really takes this help build a better internet part very seriously. And so when my resume came across and the job was kind of like not super well defined, but you're going to advocate for a better internet, and we're going to find some work for you to do on what we actually need to do, that really fit well. And so my kind of day job is I'm on the team that builds out our network. Where do we need to grow our network? What areas of the world are not performing the way they should? And where can we put new data centers that will make the internet faster? And measuring the time that content and service take to reach eyeballs, and how can we make that better?
Excellent. And I'm definitely going to be spreading the word around the tribal broadband boot camps and things like that to make sure they're aware of that.
Yeah, Project Pangea, if folks want to Google that.
Okay. Yeah. The challenge is always getting them off of the land into that data center.
Once you're at the data center, the connection to the internet it's one piece of it. And there's a lot of work in the middle mile, and there's a tremendous amount of work in the last mile. And so I think while we're trying to help with this one piece, I think it would be also interesting if Cloudflare could have more partnerships with others who are doing middle mile and last mile to kind of offer it as a whole service, because I can feel for the folks who are building these networks from scratch and the amount of work going into both the last mile and the middle mile. And so we want to help with what we can, but we also want to help as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. Getting to the BSL, the broadband serviceable locations. It was funny because it took me. I know that other people have also been talking about this, but the implications I had not considered. But why don't you walk us through that most recent newsletter post about what the FCC is doing, and not necessarily the FCC is crazy to do it this way, but what the implications are.
Well, I guess I'll first by making what may be a controversial statement, which is I think that there's a lot of good in the Form 477 data. I think it's a very valuable data set. It has limitations. An obvious limitation is that if one person is served in the census block, the whole census block is considered served. We kind of all know that limitation now.
And the corollary of just briefly of that is also that if there are two service providers, you don't actually know if they're compete with each other or anything else. And so like there's a number of additional challenges with that problem.
Right. If an area is not served, we know that it is not served. I don't think that there's debate.
Take that to the bank.
Right. And I think that there are, also we don't talk about it a lot, but there's a technology code on the Form 477 data.
It has that frequently. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do too. It has the exact kind of DSL service and the exact DOCSIS version of each census block. So there's some really good data there too. And so getting into that post, what I would recommend happens as part of this new mapping process is we make sure that the good of the Form 477 data is carried through to the new broadband serviceable location fabric maps. And in particular, right now, it is fairly easy to come up with numbers about how many Americans are unserved or underserved by broadband, how many housing units are.
At least a floor on that.
Yeah, a floor on that. And I would hope that with this, once we're all over to the new maps, which are going to be great, that we can still produce numbers that are as simple as that. And so in reading through the latest update from the FCC, one thing that just concerned me a little bit, and I don't have access to data, so another point we should talk about, is to make sure that when this happens, that we're not measuring the digital divide in terms of broadband serviceable locations, because it doesn't feel terribly real to me. It includes businesses, it includes residences. There was a line that maybe you're referencing in there that there will be a count of housing units that are associated with a broadband serviceable location, but they can't guarantee that that is reliable. It's based on tax records and stuff that are not universally available. So do we know the relationship between a broadband serviceable location and a housing unit and the number of people that live there? And so the link between those and kind of census data or kind of some other kind of ground truth about the number of people who are represented, I think is really important.
I think the issue is that a broadband serviceable location, just to be really clear, could include a single person living alone, or it could include 1,000 units. And presumably that most of the cases where that location has 1,000 units or 300 units or whatever, everyone will have service. But one of the things I've found when you're dealing with very large numbers of people in different circumstances in cities and rural areas is that there's all kinds of weird exceptions. You know, I was joking the other day that like people think 99% is all the time, but it's not. When you're dealing with large numbers, 1% is a lot. And so you're going to have a number, you might have 1 million people that are left out because you've assumed that every location or every household within a apartment building has service because some of them do.
Right. And the stakes are very, very high here because the infrastructure money is given out based on these new maps, and then the new maps are are unserved. The number of unserved locations is what decides how the money is allocated by state, and so the stakes are very high. And I have a lot of sympathy for the FCC folks who are working on these maps because they are so important, and there is such tremendous pressure to get them right and to get them fast. I mean, that's hard.
Well, and this is where I think the FCC's made some errors on this, and in that I think it is foolish to try to resolve all of this, the location fabric stuff, as well as the new mapping technology and the challenge process and everything in order to get the rough figures to NTIA so they can divide the $42.5 billion among the states. I feel like the smartest thing to do would have been to say, we're going to use Form 477 data. We know it's not perfect, but we would expect that any errors are correlated, and that like even if we don't have the exact right numbers for Georgia, we're going to make the same mistakes in Georgia as in Alabama, and the proportions are going to be roughly the same for how many unserved people there are, and we're going to use that to get money out the door, because I have no faith that in early 2023 that we will have maps that people can broadly agree upon.
I in part agree. I think there is a little bit of an issue, which is that Congress wrote into the law a lot of this stuff. They wrote into the law how these new maps were going to be created. Congress has some talents, but deciding exactly how we're going to develop new maps, I'm not sure is one of them, and it goes into a lot of detail. And so the road was pretty well laid out in front of the FCC on what exactly they have to do and how the infrastructure money will be doled out. But I agree with you that we should find a way. I think that there's like $100 million per state given out as like the beginnings. Right. But I agree with you. We should find a way to give out as much of it as possible earlier on, and then true it up at the end. Save enough that you can true it up at the end, because I agree with you. We need to get started, and if the new maps and the challenges and stuff drag it out into next year, I think that would be unfortunate. When I agree with you that we know where to start. There's a lot of planning to do. Let's get going.
And I'm curious because you had said the maps, and I don't know if you've heard. I think you expressed some optimism around the new maps being good, and I feel like Doug Dawson and I are deeply pessimistic about this whenever we talk about it publicly, because I just see that we're talking about more than 100 million serviceable locations that everyone has to agree upon, not down to the last one, but I mean to get it roughly, like even just that alone is a daunting task, and then on top of that we have to figure out how we're going to accept the modeling of DSL and wireless service when those providers do not know with any degree of certainty how each broadband serviceable location will receive their service and what kind of service would be available there. And so when I look at those two things, and I think it's important because, I mean, I'm willing to just say, all right, let's just ignore DSL because it gets more of a problem than it's worth. But fixed wireless can do quite a bit. And that's the real challenge of figuring out how one, like, I mean, you could probably say that every single company that submits fixed wireless data is wrong, right? At some level, if you wanted to.
Right. I agree that fixed wireless is a tricky part of it. And also because fixed wireless kind of sits kind of across the unserved and definitely the underserved divide in some cases. And so with fiber, you're obviously going to be served. Right. With cable, you're almost certainly going to be served by whatever definition we come up with, and there are future DOCSIS versions that will make cable even better. With DSL, I'm with you. You're unserved in my mind. I don't care what the data says. With fixed wireless, it is just so dependent on a little bit on the technology, but a lot on the location and the line of sight and the density of the trees and this stuff. And I don't think, yeah. And so, and that could very legitimately put a house where the antenna is on the house, whether it can get above the tree line. That could very realistically change somebody from served to underserved or unserved, and how that gets represented in the data, it feels very important and very hard.
Would you like that job? Like, is that something where you're just like, oh man, that would be an interesting challenge? Or are you just like, nah, I'm really happy to just not be responsible for that? Because I don't want it. I'll be honest about it.
I want to analyze the data. I want to, I think that the new rules, if I understand them correctly, the propagation models will be public. And so in each fixed wireless provider will need to provide details of how they're doing those propagation models. And so I would like to help make sure that we are kind of measuring them accurately, and that if we're saying that some place is served by fixed wireless, that you actually can get the signal that is promised by that.
And that leads us right into, I think, one of the other interesting discussions that you came out, I think, organically with something that I've been talking about with John Chambers in the past and deeply concerned about, which is this question of that it's secret how much we think it'll cost. And by we, I mean, it's secret how much the government thinks it will cost to pass a location effectively, right? With the modeling done by CostQuest. I can't imagine that there's a justification for that. There's just no real good reason that the FCC should allow some of this stuff to remain a secret when it's so important for getting it right and oversight, I think.
As a kind of freelance analyst on this stuff, we need public access to the data. And I guess I understand what is happening, which is that, the FCC, presumably it doesn't cost as much if it's not public, because once it's public, then you can't sell it to anyone else, or at least it has a lot less value if
it doesn't cost
public.
as much to the FCC in that direct line item, but I feel like ultimately we all end up paying for it in multiple ways, right? I mean, the fact that the federal government doesn't have like a better listing of all of the different locations in the country, I think is something that we are paying for now at the FCC, right?
Yeah, and now, I mean, every single state, it should, and some already do, they're going to need an estimate of how much each location costs to serve. And they're going to have to buy that themselves someplace. And wouldn't it be that much more efficient if we could all be using a single data set? And I think the same goes for the location fabric, which is, if I understand correctly, there'll be like a map that you could see on a location by location basis, but that the actual raw data wouldn't be available because of kind of contracting issues.
Yeah, I find that, just really frustrating. I don't remember when it was, although I do remember a second or third time that I came across the idea. But the first time I came across the idea of just how important it was to have open data blew me away. Like sort of what NOAA does, right? Like the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration, if I got that right. They make all the weather forecasting possible, right? And they make all this available. And at first I was like, oh, like why is the government doing that? And because like farmers depend on it, businesses depend on it, UPS depends, like everyone freaking depends on it. It's amazing how important open data is to build upon. And I feel like that's the foundation of a functioning market as well, is having open data that different people, when everything's proprietary, you can't have any real competition or choice.
Yep. And I think the FCC has done a great job of that in the past. The Form 477 data and a lot of the FCC's projections and RDOF results and other auction results and the licensing databases. And there is a lot out there. Let's keep going in that direction.
Right. And I would just note that USAC is not in that same category in my mind, but the FCC, particularly with RDOF and the CAF2, I thought was remarkably transparent.
Yep. And especially in a world in which there are a lot of broadband funding programs across a bunch of different agencies and states and stuff. And so let's make it easier for folks to combine those data sets and analyze them, not harder. I'll give you an example of this. Is one that I think we all kind of collectively had access to and missed, which is the problems in RDOF. Derek Turner at Free Press did a lot of great research on this and uncovering, road medians and stuff that were eligible and were funded. Those were public, and there were a couple rounds before the auction of here are the eligible locations. They're on our website, and nobody seemed to notice until afterwards. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be open data. It just means that next time somebody should notice beforehand.
No, but I think it really conveys the value of open data when an agency is not doing the verification work, right? I mean, like, I think like you said, that 477 data being open explained why when Barrier Free claimed to serve every last location in Pennsylvania with fiber optics, despite having not done very much the 6 months before, we could dig into that and figure out why and make an issue of it. And the FCC should have caught that, just like the FCC should have caught the median stuff. Like Derek Turner is terrific, but the FCC should have the resources to hire multiple Derek Turner types who are doing that work. And the fact that they are not doing that work well makes it even more important that it all be open, I would think.
Right. And that was a long time ago now. And I think people would argue, I didn't follow it that closely at the time, that process was rushed. But still, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's rushed, but it's also like, this is the thing I don't understand, and no one's ever explain it to me yet. I mean, I'll stop chirping about it when I get an explanation. But like the FCC is really late on the 477 data right now. And I don't understand why it takes it so long to get the data out when it doesn't do very much sanity checking on whether or not it's accurate. Like I don't understand. Like it's like aging in a cave somewhere like cheese while like, and then all of a sudden it'll be released. But as far as I can tell, there's not like a team of people who are working on it for months, like they're just sort of, they like put it in a vault and then they're like, oh, we should release it now. And they, I don't understand the process. And
I don't know how all that works, but I certainly would love to be using data that's more up to date than December of 2020. I guess a related point, just really quickly, is that the census's ACS data is also super important here. That's our best look at who has adopted broadband. And that data is also late. Mm-hmm. And I think they missed a year or something. But, that if you average over 5 years, that data goes down to the block group level and is our only, the 477 data says that basically 100% of urban areas are served by broadband. And yeah, there's a lot of coaxial cable in urban areas, but unless you have the ACS data from the census, you don't know how many people are actually using the service. And so both of those, access and adoption, are crucial data sets to have.
I agree. I'll just note though. Also, I feel like sometimes people give a little bit too much weight to the ACS data, just in the sense that like I'm interested in the change over time generally, because again, I think that's often correlated. But like when we look at like how many people say that they use satellite service, when we then try to square that up with other known things, and actually I say we, but really Derek Turner, who's done this work also, specifically, and who I trust on this, he finds that like it's like 4 times the number of people that actually use satellite tell the ACS that they use satellite because they're just confused about the technology. So, so like I'm always looking at that for change over time as opposed to like what's the specific percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about how you stay informed on this stuff because, you're working, and tell me I'm wrong, but I think of you as being slightly more in IT than telecom, and being more technological as opposed to telecom. And I feel like it's super easy. Like there's so many places to like learn about technology, Ars Technica, The Verge, there's so many wonderful places. And then in telecom, it feels like you very rapidly run into like industry specific things that can be intimidating for people that aren't in the business every day, which is less so for you, but for another person that's listening, like what do you recommend for people to get up to speed on this stuff when they're not doing it 24/7?
It is a little bit inaccessible, and we're not always super welcoming of new people into the conversation. And I'd like to give you credit. I think you were one of the first people who responded to me when I wanted to have a conversation on Twitter or something. And Harold Feld too. What I do personally is I read the Benton Institute Digest. I read the Keller and Heckman Digest almost every day. I also read a bunch of industry stuff. I think that's probably more kind of my day job related, but light reading and Broadband Bunch and a bunch of other things where some of the industry speak starts to come in. But and then I also use the historical record that you've built up with this podcast. And so, for example, when I first got started, I listened to all of your old Ammon episodes, and there's probably 5 or 6, maybe even a couple more than that, including ones where you're out there, and to understand the model that different communities and networks are using to set up and how they actually work. And so there's a lot out there, this podcast being a prime example of historical stuff, as well as kind of keeping up to date on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I'll take a second to say that when we set up immunitynetworks.org, my goal was, again, I mean, I keep saying this, like change over time. Like I wanted to have a tagging system that I hope makes it easy. And I think we've been screwing around for 9 months now trying to, we got a version of the immunitynetworks.org in development that will hopefully be more simple and easy to use. And I've been trying to do an overview of the tagging system, which is out of control because I just feel like at this point it's just too intimidating for anyone to work at. But the goal is absolutely, if you're like, oh, I want to see what's going on in Ammon, well, you should be able to like click a button and get a listing of all the Ammon related stuff, and that's our goal. So I'm glad. It always warms my heart when I hear that someone's using it in that way.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what are you excited about as we close out the interview? Like, as we look forward, I feel like, I'm often sort of like worried about things, but what are you looking forward to in terms of things where you're like, you know what, this problem's going to be solved soon?
One thing that I'm very passionate about, and there's a lot of momentum behind, is the importance of latency in the overall internet connection. Mm-hmm. And so when I think of speed, I think of latency. Speed to me is not the throughput of the connection. It is how fast that you can request data and it can get back to you. And I think, going back, it's actually almost 10 years exactly, there was a Google study that showed that above about 5 megabits per second, a web page doesn't load any faster, or a very negligible improvement in page load time for throughput above about 5 megabits per second. Whereas if you have the latency in the connection, you can almost half the page load time. And so we always talk about latency in terms of gaming. It's a lot more important than that. It's about It's about page load time. It's about gaming. It's about, if you think about swiping on a map on your phone, if you can have really good latency, you don't need to preload that data to go to your phone. Your phone can respond to the swipe. That means less throughput.
Let me try and make this point, and it's sort of a hobby horse that I've had for a long time, and you can tell me that I'm crazy, but this is where I think latency is really important, right? Like I think of this, there's two different things in my one is the performance of applications, and one is security related. The security one's easy to grasp. All of our machines are porous and at risk of ransomware, right? Even Apple products, PCs, whatever, like everything has massive vulnerabilities because they're super complicated and difficult to secure, and there's not a lot of market, incentive to focus on securing them. I think one of the things that happens in a low latency, in a world where everyone is connected is we have dumber computers that are cheaper, that are basically thin clients, and we don't have to worry about securing them. The complicated stuff happens in a local cloud, and we're accessing it, and we don't notice the difference because we have that low latency, right? And so I think security is one. The other is this. Frickin' Nikon keeps coming out with like better camera. I mean, all of them do, but I like Nikon. And every time they do, I have to buy another computer. And then like 2 years later, there's another. And I shoot professionally. Not everyone is on this upgrade cycle, but like, I would much rather have a computer that I could use for 5 or 6 years, and I'll just like pay Adobe a little bit more money, and they do all the processing in the cloud as I'm going through these hundreds of images for clients. And that for those things, like, it would be wonderful to have those scenarios, and I think everyone would pay less, would have less e-waste. There's so many benefits of moving in that direction.
I think we're close to there. I have a very expensive MacBook, but I use it as a client for cloud services.
Right.
That it's a slight exaggeration, but not much of one. And I think when going back to my political campaign life, we gave people Chromebooks. Because of the security, because they're better security wise, and if they disappear, there's not anything there to take, and so I think we may be closer or already there to what you're describing.
Right, but I think of like my wife's experience working for the city of Minneapolis or the state of Minnesota, where they're using like Citrix software on a high latency connection, and they hate it, and they're like, "Well, this technology sucks." And it's like, well, it actually works really well if you give it the right specifications.
Right. Yep. I think that's a great example of, and all of that is latency behind the scenes. All of that is dependent on low latency, and it's hard to put into a metric in the same way that throughput is. But yeah, I think it's a great example.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited that I feel like you're probably the most technically sophisticated person I've explained this vision to. And you're not like, no, it's not going to happen, Chris. Thank you so much for the time today. And I one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I just think it's really exciting that I feel like you show, like, one does not have to have spent decades, working in the industry. You don't have to have like tons of degrees in telecom. You can jump into this, you can learn it, and do really interesting analyses and make a difference. So I think you're making a difference. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I think you are too, Chris. Thank you.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at muninetworks.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@muninetworks.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Twitter. His handle is @CommunityNets. Follow muninetworks.org stories on Twitter. The handle's @muninetworks. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. You can catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Arnie Huseby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons. This was the Community Broadband Bits podcast. Thanks for listening.